Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, How Leading PMPs Are Redefining Strategies This Year, brought to you by Pest Management Professional Magazine and our sponsor of the event, Slingshot. I'm Danielle Pesta from North Coast Media, the digital editor for Pest Management Professional, and I will be your event manager for today's presentation. Before we get started, I want to let you know that today's webinar will be recorded. You are currently in a listen-only mode. A recording of this webinar will be posted to mypmp.net/webinars and will also be emailed to you tomorrow. At this time, I'd like to get you comfortable with our console and the ways with which you can participate during today's presentation. Please notice the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your console. If you have a question, type it in the panel's text box, then click Submit to place your question in queue. We encourage you to ask and enter any questions you may have for our speakers during the presentation. We will address these questions at the end of the presentation during the Q&A portion. Questions submitted during registration have already gone to our speaker and may be covered during the presentation. If you experience any technical difficulties during today's event, you may use the same Q&A panel on your screen to submit your issue, and assistant producer Allison Barwatz or I will personally assist you. You may learn more about today's speakers by viewing their photo, bio, and contact information in the panel located in the upper left-hand corner of your console. PMP Magazine's Twitter feed is placed on the left side of your screen. You may use the hashtag PMPWebinar to submit questions during today's webinar or to enter into discussions with other attendees. Below the Twitter feed, there is a Contact Us panel in the bottom left for you to send any follow-up remarks to Slingshot via email. These inquiries will not be addressed during the live event. If you are logged into your social media accounts, you can also share today's webinar title, description, and URL with your friends or colleagues using the Share This widget that's placed right below the slides. Also below the slides, the Refer a Colleague panel will allow you to email today's webinar information to a coworker or other industry professional. Finally, at the bottom right of the console, you will find a PDF of today's presentation, which you can download, and a link to visit Slingshot's website. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to today's moderator, content marketing producer for PMP, Mackenzie Schoner.
Thank you, Danielle, and welcome everyone to our webinar on how leading PMPs are redefining strategies this year. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to pass it over to Chris Brazier, CMO of Slingshot.
Thanks, Mackenzie. As Mackenzie said, my name is Chris Brazier, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Slingshot. I quickly wanted to say thank you to PMP for hosting the webinar and our speakers, Bill and Guy, which we'll get to in just a second. I'm really excited to see what they have planned today, and so I guess I'm a bit of your crowd warmer for a minute here to quickly speak to you about Slingshot. If you don't know, we're a 24/7 sales and customer support solution for home service businesses. So when your phones are ringing and you're unable to respond or answer in a timely manner, especially due to the increased demand that we've seen this season, our team of US-based agents are there to help answer and manage those calls. We also do text, chat, social, and web lead response. And while we do serve a lot of home service verticals, our bread and butter is pest control. Our founders come from pest control, so we can help manage that entire conversation and lead your team to servicing those contracts. The two best stats that you see here below that I like to hear, and I've even heard Bill rep to before, is about 25% of sales calls occur after hours and weekends. And second, fewer than 1 in 5 ever leave a voicemail. So if you don't want to deal with staffing those hours or make sure you capture every lead, we can take those calls, we can close them, we can collect payment, we can help schedule for you. If you're interested in learning more about Slingshot, I encourage you to go to our website at getslingshot.com or email us at this URL down below. For anyone attending today, we are offering a promotional offer. So please check us out and we'll connect you and talk shop. The last piece I'll offer is anyone that goes to our website and says hi, and that's sales@getslingshot.com as well. I'll give you a really cool swag item like socks or a hat, something from our 2010 edition. So really cool stuff. And thanks, Mackenzie.
Thanks, Chris. Today we will be hearing from Bill Welsh, VP of Sales and Region Manager for Rose Pest Solutions. Bill has been in the pest industry for over 33 years and has served in various leadership positions at Rose Pest and as Michigan's Pest Management Association President multiple times. We will also be hearing from Guy Bergeron, CEO of Frontline Pest Control. Guy started in the pest control industry by selling door-to-door pest control while attending graduate school and has overseen operations across 4 states with over 24,000 clients with Frontline Pest. During today's presentation, we will cover business continuity, regulatory pressures, remote work, productivity, and accountability, expectations from employees, customers, and commercial clients, managing company culture, and finally, Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentation for the speakers, please type your questions into the Q&A panel on the side of your console and click Submit to place your question in the queue. Now, I'll pass it over to you, Bill.
Business continuity. What an interesting topic that we've gone through here since March. With everything going on and businesses closing down, governmental units closing down, it's been a unique experience. You know, there's a famous quote, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. And there's a lot of truth to that. And it's often that you end up dusting off those plans and take a look at them. And so some of the things we've learned through this process is quite interesting. And I'm happy to share those with you as we talk about them. But I suspect most of us have experienced that, especially with the changing dynamics, sometimes day to day, and depending what's coming from CDC, depending what's coming from state regulatory folks or coming from the governor's office and so forth. So I did test our abilities to work our plan, and some of the stuff that we went through was quite interesting, and from the county level to the state level to the region level. But the good thing early on in this entire process is that pest management or pest control was considered an essential business. So we were able to operate. So the thing that we went through for us was some of the commercial and industrial and governmental units, is being able to get into them when they were closed down. And so we had some workarounds that we ended up working through and so forth. But the big picture was, as you looked at your plans and as the plans changed, how did you adapt? How did you get the messages out? And what did you do? We'll talk a little bit about that later on during this presentation. And then the other thing is that you look at your plans and make sure that people understand these plans. You think about them in the beginning and you go through them and you go, well, I never saw that coming. Well, didn't see that one coming either. And so as each thing comes through, you think through it. Don't make the snap decisions. But if you turn around and you look at your plans, you need to think about where are the decisions being made, who's making those decisions, and to strictly have one person making all the decisions may not be the right approach. Take a look at who has what responsibility and when they need to get things done. It will help you out. And I think what people have learned and businesses have learned, there's things that are going to pop up that you never dreamed of ever popping up. But it opens opportunity. There's a lot of other opportunities that become available to our industry because of what's gone on here. So I think the big picture is moving forward, how do you look at your plan, and moving forward, how do you plan for the future should something like this happen again, or any other kind of contingency that may pop up that you're not even thinking about. And so I think our industry as a whole has done a pretty good job. And I think that some of the issues that I saw out there going on early on during this process really tested everybody's mettle. enhance the positive and prepare for the negative, your business is going to be better. I think coming out of this, what we're going to find industry-wide is that there's going to be other opportunities for us to improve, one, how we service, two, how do we change our service, how do we protect our people, and how do we work with the different levels of governments, lead agencies, and moving forward in the future. So I think there was a lot of learning that went on, a lot of the folks I've talked with throughout the industry and some of the things they've learned. It's pretty interesting. And I relied on a lot of my conversation with a lot of folks throughout the country and some of the things that they were doing. And I go, oh, well, that was a good idea. So, we thought about implementing it in ours and doing different things in our business. But I think big picture-wise, we're going to come out of this a lot stronger, a lot better. I think that the plans will be thought out, how we react next time something like this happens. And I think that the regulatory agencies and some of the other stuff I'm going to be talking about, you'll find that they're rethinking their positions and everything that they do. Regulatory pressures, we all faced it. There was a whole lot of things going on, especially in those states that required certification requirements to make applications of pesticides. In some of our states, such as Michigan, you can't make an application without having a certification card, a one form or another. Well, when this thing all went on, as you guys know, that regulatory agency weren't testing. And the only way they had the testing available in Michigan was that you had to go to this site, wherever it may be, a testing site, and you had to turn around, flip your IDs out, and so forth, and sit down, take an exam on a bubble sheet. If you guys have never done a bubble sheet before, you would hate it. Anyway, you take this exam on this bubble sheet, and you turn it in, and they run it through this scanner, and they grade you, whether you pass or you fail. That was interesting. But other elements that had happened was, the state offices were shut down also. And so you don't think much about that until this happens, and then you go, okay, how are we going to make contact? There was a lot of things that happened that we never even dreamed were going to happen, but we were able to get a lot of those addressed. So how are we going to certify our new hires and new technicians? We were sitting there with a few folks sitting on the sidelines or in the process of getting trained, as most folks understand. But let me go ahead and turn it over to Guy, and then he can go ahead and explain a little further what he was working. Guy?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. As Bill said, there's obviously a lot of thinking that's gone on over the last several months as we've dealt with, the same issues that have come as a result of COVID-19. But as Bill was alluding to, as far as getting technicians certified, as you know, this is kind of a state-by-state thing. So for us, just to use one example, in the state of Tennessee, we contacted our contacts at the Department of Agriculture to kind of see what's going on at the governor's office and how this pandemic was being handled back in March at the very beginning. And the only response we were getting was it's sitting on his desk. And so for a company that's getting ready to gear up for our busy time of the year, looking to staff, that was stressful because in Tennessee, you have to test for technicians. And also for, in our case, we do have a component of our business that has door-to-door sales. Our door-to-door salespeople need to be certified before they can even sell this door-to-door in the state of Tennessee. So there was some head scratching there where there was a gap in the system where we are deemed an essential business, and that's probably the biggest. It sounds kind of strange to say now, but that was a big discovery. Was yes, we are essential, and that was kind of a validation that we received, not just as a company, but I think as an industry, that what we do provide and offer to clients, whether residential or commercial, matters. And, so here we are, we're an essential business. The government said so, but yet, local governments are not facilitating licensing or providing guidelines for what we do in this situation since the testing centers are shut down. So that was interesting for us. We actually had to redirect a sales team of about 20 to 25 sales representatives down to Richmond, Virginia. We were hoping that they'd be able to go to Tennessee, but because of this limbo state that we were in with licensing and whatnot, you're looking at some potential fines and issues if you're not, following the regulations of that state. So that was stressful, and we adapted and we learned a lot about ourselves and how we can move in unprecedented times. So that was interesting. Eventually, obviously, the governor's office kind of updated things, but in our other states, Maryland was a lot, generally speaking, is a lot less regulated in terms of testing and whatnot. And Virginia, I was actually pleased with how they handled it, but they allowed kind of this grace period where we could administer our own in-house exam and document it, but whenever orders were lifted, that we would have a certain amount of time to get our new hires to get into tests. So again, 3 different states, 3 different scenarios, but we had to have our contacts in the right places to understand what we needed to do so that we weren't, we weren't violating any regulations or having any issues down the road. So what does the future look like for this type of scenario? Here's my hope. I hope that departments of agriculture and local governments recognize the need to have more online testing available. Even before any of this happened, just for the state of Maryland, for example, everything is still kind of paper, have to be in person, and it's a large state. And, there's lost productivity to send in employees to go test and stand in line and queue up. So I'm hopeful that this has taught just the industry in general and also local governments and departments of agriculture and testing sites and whatnot to find creative ways to utilize and leverage the technologies that are already in place and, to get away from the bubble sheets like Bill was saying. And as luck would have it, I had an employee this morning take a wildlife and rodent certification test in her car at the parking lot of the Department of Agriculture. So just an interesting scenario, but hopefully what the future brings is an ability to be more flexible, to be more nimble, to allow businesses to operate a little bit more effectively with or without a pandemic, just to be able to recertify or to license employees in whatever categories that are needed. So in our preparations for this talk, I know Bill had some good things to say about effective ways to make these changes. So Bill, why don't you go ahead with that?
Well, I appreciate it, Geek. As interesting as we've gone through this process, probably one of the best things that I can recommend to anybody is to make sure they know who their legislative representatives are. I work as a state public affairs representative for the state of Michigan and for Indiana. And while I knew who my representatives were, and I knew who I needed to talk to, I have a lobbyist that I work with and so forth through the state association. I also worked closely with the National Pest Management Association. And I tell you what, they did a heck of a job helping out in a lot of different issues because you're going to have to work on 3 different levels. And so, at first, of course, you pick up the phone, you call the regulatory officials, and if you don't have a good relationship with them, it's tough to get stuff done. I fortunately had a good relationship with them, so I was talking to them and so forth. And the interesting thing was, during this process, the lead agency had a workaround plan up and ready to go within 4 days. And so they had a plan and they were going to do it. We had to work around for the certification issue where we can get what we call an RT certification in the state of Michigan, which you can use general use pesticides. People get tested and they had it all worked out. However, when this thing became so political, it was being held back. And so at that point, you have to go through the administrative level. And so when you go into the administrative level, you end up working through the governor's office. And so the governor's office has specialists, if you will. And these specialists are folks that work for them that advises them on policy. So in this case, in Michigan, they had an agricultural specialist. She was 23 years old, just out of school, and I had to explain to her pest management. And so I had to train her along the way. That took a while, and getting her up to speed and speaking to the benefits of pest management in a time like this. And in Michigan, just coming off a triple E year last year and explaining some of those other issues. And then if you have contacts on the legislative side, while I had my own personal contacts and I can call them and talk to them, our member firms also were working on their legislative contacts. And so what we ended up doing was doing a voter voice and send out over 1,000 letters out to the legislature, out to the administration, the governor, lieutenant governor, and so forth. And so what come of that was I was able to talk directly with the chairs of both the House and the Senate side ag committees. And so as this process was going on, so you're touching all three levels, but you got to have relationships at all three levels. And it's impossible for one person to do it. And when you get the rest of the state PMPs involved through the association, you get a lot more legroom rather quickly. And so in this particular case, what ended up happening was we working to the regulatory officials. I already knew what their plan was. It was going to work. So I was working to the governor's level trying to make it happen, and it kept getting pushed off. Well, finally, an executive order came out as it relates to those which were recertifying their credentials. They got extended. And those with business credentials that needed to be done, what we call a PABL, Pesticide Applicator Business License, there was an executive order that came out with that. So we extended those two things, but it still didn't help us in the realm of new people who were trying to get certified. You're still going to have people retiring. You're still going to have people, unfortunately, get sick or get hurt or whatever, and you got to backfill those positions. And if you can't backfill those positions, you're leaning on your other people really heavy, which increases chances of ongoing problems. And so as you work through those issues, it ended up that we've got the piece of legislation introduced. And so it was introduced and it went to the Senate Ag Committee. As soon as that posted and came through, immediately the governor's office came back with another executive order at that point and said, we can have a workaround for the plan. And they accepted the plan that the regulatory officials had originally put together. That was 50 days from start to finish, the daily contacts on the phones. And so the key here is not to limit the exposure to one, but to make sure you understand all the different levels and making sure that you're talking to everybody else, working with your association within the state and working with national, because national was really helpful in getting a lot of things done, especially in the voter voice thing. So those are some of the key elements or takeaway points coming out of this that worked real well. And so I can't tell folks to talk to their legislatures. Manager making a decision on local level before talking to state level. If you got multiple locations, sometimes local managers have a way of making decisions. And how some of this was going is some of the state inspectors were making decisions and not communicating it back up to the chain of command, up to their state officials to have the lead on it. And so you had a bunch of different things going on at once. And so working through those processes, you hear something from one side of the state or one region of the state, and you're trying to figure out, okay, is this official? And, I was able to find out about it, and then I would call the person at what we call the PPPM desk, which is the guy that oversees us, and ask him about it, and he would, no, you want to do it this way or whatever the case may be. And so once we were able to get those processes in place, it was very helpful getting a whole lot of things done, because you could ferret through some of the stuff that people were making decisions on that could come back to haunt you later on. So state officials finally got their act together in that regard. So that was part of that learning process, and know when to pick up the phone and ask the question. And so I think at that point in time when you're doing that, it makes a big difference. But the big thing we've learned, or I've learned through this whole process, is making sure those communications back and forth are going on a regular basis. And you got to the point where I was calling state officials, it's time for the daily update. And same thing with the legislative folks. It was time for a daily update. We all share everything we've been hearing and what's been going on. That didn't happen so much on the administration level, but it did at the state level, in the legislature, and in the officials' legislature. All right. So hopefully that helps. And in terms of the productivity and accountability during these pieces, let me go ahead and turn it over to Guy and let him share his ideas with you.
Thanks, Bill. And obviously getting the regulatory and compliance side of things and in order is very important to run a business. But let's talk about the actual business components and what we've learned over the last few months and how to be productive and how to maintain an accountable workforce, in spite of a more distance or remote type workplace. So I think for most of us, March and April, we might scratch up as a mulligan on the scorecard in terms of, how we're going to approach these things, because this was all brand new for so many of us and so many things were moving at the same time. I think also what most of us have seen as well is that May and June brought some really incredible opportunities, particularly on the sales side of the business, where we're finding a lot of new customers and opportunities, which impacts and bleeds into all other parts of the business as well. So one of the perhaps most important lessons I think that we've learned and in talking to just companies in general is leveraging technology and how to operate in a more remote workplace. So in a lot of ways, especially for service technicians, they're already remote workers. So I think to a certain degree, hopefully a lot of our industry was prepared for how to manage that workforce remotely, because we already manage our technicians remotely. Now, there were a few things that we had to adjust, and some things that luckily we had already started doing a few years back that kind of made this transition easier. So maybe some things to consider for your business if you're not doing some of these things, or you thought about doing them and you weren't sure, just to consider. So one of those things is to have technicians living closer to the areas that they service. We made this change several years ago, maybe about 5 years ago, where we made a conscious decision as a company, rather than hiring technicians close to the office, because back then we were still printing paper tickets. Technicians had to come in and pick up their routes. They would go out and complete the routes and then come back to the office and drop off their completed paperwork. We made the decision a few years back to consciously say, you know what, we have technology now. We have handheld devices. We have an app for our CRM where we can complete tickets electronically, and all that can be conveyed through mediums of technology that are available to us. So this has saved incredible time in terms of windshield time. As a business, we all know that the more time our vehicles are on the road, the less productive we are. The more time we spend on site producing and generating revenue, the better. So we've limited a lot of drive time. That's less wear and tear on your vehicles, fuel economies, and other just benefits to the technician, not having to feel like they're on the road so often. They can be more productive in working. Another part of our business that we've really, and we've been thinking about, and this has really kind of forced us to think about a little bit harder, is having more streamlined content for training and continuity. Our business size currently is at about 50 or so field technicians. A little bit different than a company like Rose Pest Control, where they have a couple hundred, and a commercial component to their business, whereas we're strictly residential. So what are ways that we can streamline our training in a way that's not only relevant in the present, but has a continuity to it, so that onboarding employees and technicians or other employees that have been with us for a while are on the same page. Kind of in line with technicians living closer to their service area, not close to the office. There are pros and cons to this approach, but again, we made a conscious decision a few years back that you only need to come to the office once a week. And so we've deployed tools for technicians to make an order, fill out an order form electronically for products that they'll need for the next week. Those orders are fulfilled and their shelves are stocked, almost like a store, where they just need to come in and they can check out the things that they ordered, and we can track it all to the individual technician. So if you don't have currently some inventory procedures in place on how you're tracking that per technician, that's a big thing for us to consider moving forward as an industry, so that we're more efficient with the products we have. New communication channels. I have Slack here in parentheses. We've been using Slack for several years. It's been a benefit. There are challenges to using a platform like Slack as well for certain types of communication that may not be the best way, but it's certainly helped keep a certain level of continuity of communication between the office, salespeople, technicians, leadership, ownership. But exploring other communication tools. We're currently looking to implement a new form of technology to facilitate communication kind of in a one-way direction from the leaders to the rest of the organization, and avoid the noise that comes with a communication platform like Slack, where you can send a message and it gets lost because a lot of people are responding, or someone else sends a message almost simultaneously, and you don't get the efficacy of that communication like you wanted to. So in the next couple of weeks, we ourselves are looking to implement a new form of communication that very cleanly and intuitively makes it very simple for a leader to, across the board, to certain departments or groups of employees or whatnot, to deploy digital content and information in a way that's going to be meaningful, with the ability to know that that information was actually viewed with kind of a self-reporting component. So that's something we're excited about, and that we're exploring as a result of this. This year in particular, the first couple of months, it was challenging because, as many of you, March is a time to kind of gear up for a busy time of year. We do a lot of hiring end of February, beginning of March, and not having technician meetings to help maintain physical distancing and trying to make sure that we're providing a safe workplace environment was challenging, because we already only meet once a week, and so losing that entirely resulted in some loss of face time. Now, luckily, with our existing employees, we've developed a good enough rapport to where we can call, we can talk, and it's easier to get a gauge on those groups of people. But what about the new hires? So after a little while, when we started getting a grip on this whole thing, we started slowly incorporating smaller meetings with safety protocols in place, especially for our new technicians. So that was something that was helpful, made them feel more comfortable and confident what they were doing as they were learning new things, but also made us comfortable in their abilities to do that as well. So also, if you're not currently using electronic invoices or electronic tickets or electronic paperwork, I would strongly encourage you to start doing that. Even without a pandemic, there's so many efficiencies to doing it. Obviously, there's a bit of an implementation cost, if you will, in terms of figuring out the best systems and processes and protocols to do that while also maintaining your compliance with whatever regulations are in place. But that would be a big consideration to make, is to just move away from paper and start using the digital tools that are available to us. As far as productivity, I'm going to switch gears more here on the office side of things. Our office staff, generally speaking, previously was all in one office location. So when COVID-19 started, as we know, the workplace has now been pushed to home. That made us nervous a little bit because we had never done that before, and we weren't sure how that was going to go. It's easy when you're in the same room as people to be able to see who's in the room, who's showing up on time, who's sleeping at their desk, or who's chatting with their neighbor or being unproductive or whatever. When you don't see them, that brought a different degree of, discomfort for a leader to not really know. So that forced us to look at our internal kind of office operations of how are we tracking the efficacy of our customer service agents, their available time on the phones, tickets being closed out and payments process and all these sorts of things. So this was good for us, and I was actually really proud of our team, how that was handled, and we really stayed on top of that, and it forced a certain degree of communication that we perhaps didn't have before. In our estimation, being in an office setting is good, but there's also a certain degree of distraction that can come from having an office setting, where when I'm working from home, we don't have the how was your weekend chat and it turns into a 30-minute conversation about the ball game, or whatever. Not saying that's a bad thing, because that could build relationships and a certain degree of respect and camaraderie or whatnot, but I found that there were also some upsides to having office personnel working from home where they can really be dialed in on the task at hand and not be distracted by coworkers, because we know that can happen sometimes. One interesting thing, after we started doing this for about a month, we started to sense this cloud a little bit looming over office people answering phones, and everybody thought that they were doing more than everybody else. I'm taking back-to-back phone calls, or why isn't anyone logged in the phones to take this, or why am I the only one answering the technician's phone calls, or whatever the case might be. And this was, let's see, we're August now, so this was probably at the end of June, beginning of July, where this feeling started to kind of creep in. And we started to slow, because we had to hire some new customer service agents. So we did have our office managers still be in the office, and we had customer service agents that were newly hired in the office as well, so that we can have proper oversight and accessibility to a manager if they had questions or whatnot. And we spaced out the desks in the office in a way that made everyone comfortable and safe. And that was good. And so we slowly started incorporating some of our previous people that had gone home to come back in the office with the kind of adjusted office setup and protocol. And that cloud that was hanging over disappeared pretty quickly. They quickly realized that, no, they're not the only ones feeling all the phone calls. And, that isolation feeling quickly disappeared, and realized that, okay, we're doing this together. So that was a good lesson to be learned as well. One quick thing that I'd say with this as well, and Chris mentioned this at the very beginning, but a shameless plug here for Slingshot, I guess, but we found tremendous value in having partnered with a company like Slingshot. For us, we've been with them for about 5 years, but it's a really nice relief to know that from a sales standpoint, especially when sales really started ramping up May, June, and July, we've had tremendous opportunities there. know that the ball is not going to be dropped on the receiving end over there, and that's been a huge relief to us 24/7. So again, other considerations to make in terms of how we are productive and maintain accountability in kind of a new workplace environment with that. I talked a bit about leveraging technology here. And there's a lot of opportunities out there. There's a lot of different pieces of technology, but I do think there are ways to leverage technology to maintain an accountable workforce, whether it's inside the office or working from home. We want to be able to make sure that our employees are doing what they're supposed to do for the benefit of our customers. We're in the business of taking care of people and their homes and their businesses and providing a service. And obviously one of the fears as a leader who operates a business where there's a remote component to what we do, mainly the servicing side, is we want to make sure that people are being held accountable. So we're still looking into that. As I mentioned, we're looking into something that we're starting to implement ourselves and seeing how it's going to go. But we want to be able to be in touch. We want to be able to know what's going on. And I think as much as employees might say they don't like accountability, I think we all want to be held accountable to a certain respect to what we're doing. So one big thing for us is this middle point here of just streamlining the online training. That's something that we've relied a lot on the weekly meetings, the training with the trainer, and kind of ongoing education there. But we really want to be better at maintaining a training focus online and remotely rather than relying on an in-person experience there. So anyways, we talked a lot in preparation for this and just, internally and, talking with those with their business about, what are the expectations now moving forward? That's a little bit different. The world is different now with what employees expect from their employers, what the customers expect, whether residential or commercial. One of the employee concerns that we had, this was a technician of ours, he says, I have a grandfather that's living in my home with us, so I'm worried about bringing this thing home. I'm worried about his health. So for us, one of the big realizations, and hopefully we all realize this, is that truly the greatest asset that we have as a company is our human capital. It's our people. We should always keep that in the forefront of our minds. Yes, we are about providing a service. We're about generating revenue. We're about growth and all these other sorts of things. But without our human capital, without our people, this doesn't happen. And sometimes when you get caught up in the grind, it can become easy to lose sight of that. There's a line that I like to use within our company. I just say our technicians are my customers. My office staff are my customers. If I can ensure that my technicians truly feel like I'm trying to do what's best for them, then I'm going to have complete alignment of interest there. They're going to know that I have their best interests at heart. And it has to be sincere. It has to be genuine. This takes time. This takes relationship building. It has to be genuine because the employees will sense what's phony and what's not genuine. So that's something that I feel like we've been good at. Again, our size of company allows that to a certain degree, but even now with 50 technicians and a bunch of other employees in the office and salespeople, it can become hard to keep track of everyone's needs and whatnot, and becomes challenging. But never forget that your greatest asset in your business is your people. Even strictly from a financial standpoint, that's probably the biggest expense for a business is going to be payroll. So keep that in mind, and that's a lesson kind of reaffirmed as well. The expectations of the consumer has changed as well. I think most, at least our residential customers, were pretty understanding of the safety procedures that we were going through, trying to maintain them safe and maintain safety for our technicians and being responsible about the way we're going about this while still ensuring that we're providing a valuable service for them. So we developed some basic scripts for just qualifying a service, especially for inside services where is this an issue that truly requires us to come inside, or is there something we can do on the exterior of the home to help mitigate this problem or relieve some pest pressure that you're having inside your home? Just basic questions about just talking about health. And this is obviously sensitive, and as you probably experienced, your technicians and customers, along with the rest of the world, has a varying opinion on the spectrum of this pandemic. And so staying in the middle, if you will, has always been kind of a good protocol for us, and not regardless of what personal opinion I might have or my technician might have or my customer service agent might have, just communicating that this is what we're doing and this is why. And most people are understanding of that, but of course you have to handle the tough ones case by case, and hopefully there's some mutual understanding there. One thing that we found interesting was that previously in a residential type service, we found that a third of the customers would be home previously and 2/3 would not be. So that's maybe kind of flipped around, where maybe 2/3 of people are home, or maybe even more, and the third aren't. So things like punctuality, even though that homeowner may not necessarily cared what time you came, because we sent a notification that we were coming at such and such a time, they're paying a little bit more attention to see if we actually show up at such a time. Whereas before, if they were at work working, they wouldn't know any different. So appearance, the perception of your service, the speed at which you do it, all those things have kind of come into play in terms of what the customer expects. We have more callback services, it feels like, this summer. More people are home. They're working in their basements. They're spending more time in their yard. They're more aware of what's going on, so we're getting more calls on that. So, this obviously bleeds into managing technicians' expectations of service calls and why are we going back to this house to take care of this thing or whatnot. And these things all kind of tie together. So yeah, the customer expectation definitely has changed as well, and potentially will continue to change as we continue to navigate the rest of this pandemic here. So on the commercial side of things, Bill, I'll let you kind of handle the expectations on that side as you guys have been dealing with.
Thank you, Guy. It's interesting as we've gone through this process is, you start getting all these letters from these commercial entities that you do business for. And they all have differing protocols. And some of them are making up the protocols as it goes. Some of them are county-wide protocols. Some are statewide protocols and so forth. One of the things we implemented right away was a Google Sheet, asking the 4 basic questions, temperature, have you been exposed to anybody with, the virus and so forth, or you've been traveling and type thing. So we have these 4 questions our people have to answer every day. And if they answer yes to any of them, it's a stop. Okay, talk to your supervisor, and they're not permitted to work and all that kind of stuff. So we kind of thought, most businesses would do that. Wrong answer, because each one made up their own. Now, you could probably put them in, 2 or 3 buckets of how they were doing it. But the interesting thing was some of them were following state guidelines, some of them were following CDC guidelines, and some of them were following county guidelines, and some even down to the city level. So you had to pay attention to that and find out what it was and so forth. And oftentimes you end up making phone calls to these folks and say, no, this is how we're doing it, and will this suffice and all that. They primarily wanted to see that their service providers were doing something. And that's what we saw out of this. And, coming into it, all the commercial and residential side for us, it was fairly easy because we sent a letter out to them what we were doing type thing. We really never got any question back on it. Now, we had more questions for our clients, and we would ask them the same questions. because there was times where they said, hey, we had an exposure here, or somebody's been exposed here, you didn't do the inside, you did the outside. And so part of that changed in a commercial arena, where they would want some preventative work on the inside, that pretty much stopped in a lot of cases. And they said, perform the work on the outside. If we need the inside, we'll let you know. And so as we've gone through that, and, I think we're through all those processes now, but it took a while to figure out, okay, how are we going to get this information to these people with the amount of accounts that we're talking about? And it's quite large. And that got tough coming out of at a corporate, and you think, well, okay, we got one side. No, we're doing 45 of those sites. And maybe you have 45 technicians doing them, So you just never knew how that was going to come out. But as we worked through that process, and I think the last thing here is the trust level. The trust level was the most important thing. And I think the general consumer or client understood we were out there for their best interest, and that's what they were looking for. And they appreciated the activities and the different things that we did. One, to protect our people, and two, to protect them. Managing the culture is one of the other key elements that we learned through this process. Oftentimes what you find in corporations is that, everything they do by memo. Well, I'm going to put this in writing for everybody to read. Everybody's going to see this and all that. And one of the things we talked about is now we got to get people out front. We got to we have to take a different approach, because it's one thing if you've ever read a manual how to do something. It's another thing when you see it live. And it was quite dramatic, the impact on there. So one of the things we wanted to make sure is that the leaders got out front. And so what we said is, okay, you guys are going to make weekly videos. The CEO level and the president level, you're going to make weekly conversations with the people as a whole. And so the video thing that we did on a weekly basis was pretty cool. And so what they would do, they would record a video, and it wasn't a long one. It was probably, anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. Don't go any further than that because you'll lose them. But so it was a 5 or 10 minute video talking about here's what the updates are, here's what's going on, here's what we're doing. And of course, safety was one of the biggest components in there. But we talked about it, and they got to see the human side of the CEO and president. A lot of times our employees, they see them during initial classes, or we'll see them at company conferences and so forth. But they got to see them on a weekly basis now. Now they're talking directly to the employees. That had a significant impact, because at the end of each one of those, there was a thing for the employees to write comments back. Oh, and they did. Oh, boy, did they ever do that. Part of that is it's through our LMS, and we have an online training system and all that. So what ended up happening was we could see who went in and seen the videos, who followed the training protocols that we had in place. And so we can see all of that, who was doing it, who wasn't. And sometimes you got to send them a little love letter to remind them that, hey, you got something there you got to do. And so that had a really positive impact for our people as a whole. Instead of just getting a yellow memo document with something written on it, now they see the face of the company. They see the CEO face on there talking to them, and that was pretty cool. The new hires, again, we were very careful when we brought them in. We think it's critical that they get the OJT training and all that, and there's always that separation and everything at the local office. But we did bring them in for 1 week of a corporate training, if you will. And so we brought them all in, but we kept them all separated and all that. And that way we've got department heads that can stand up in front of them and talk to them, introduce themselves and talk to them. And so we didn't want to lose that part, because we think that's probably one of the most important parts for the introduction and onboarding of new employees. And when we continued that, some folks said, well, what about this? Well, we'll keep them separate. We know how to do that. So we kept them separated, and it worked real well. And I think the big picture of this whole thing, when it's all said and done, and when this thing is over, a lot of things are going to change. A lot of things are going to change to the positive. whether it's online, the online trading, which we do, I think that's going to be expanded. I think online testing for certification, that's going to go. There's a big push for that right now, both on state and national levels. But there's a whole lot of things that go on that we've learned from that we're going to be better as an industry as a whole. But let me tack back onto one other thing that Guy had said earlier, was that the biggest asset that you got is your people. Talk to your people, protect your people, and show them that you care. And it makes a huge difference, and they'll run and knock walls down for you.
All right. Thank you both for that great presentation. Now let's move on to questions. This one is for Guy. How are you monitoring activity if we don't all end up in the office?
I'm assuming this is, so for office people. So depending on the phone system that you utilize, becoming more familiar with that phone system is going to be critical. So you can monitor, abandoned calls, how many calls are in queue, what's the average wait time of those calls that are in queue, which agents are logged in for what percentage of their available time, which ones aren't. Even just your simple, we have a clock in, clock out machine, just seeing, again, when you're in the office, you can see people walk in and walk out. When you're not, when are they really clocking in, clocking out? So making sure that you're properly utilizing those tools. So there may be other tools that exist to better monitor that. Within our CRM, we use Pest. There's ways for us to manage tasks and to monitor activity. So for us, it really forced us to be more aware of the current tools we're already using and really how they work. Whereas before, maybe we were a little bit more complacent because we could actually, because we're in the same office, we're in the same space, we can kind of generally glance over the room. Again, I'm talking about a smaller office space of maybe, 12 agents on the phone. If it's larger than that, you're probably already doing some of these things because it's hard to monitor, 50 or more people in one room. So that's, for us, is really just becoming more in touch with our current tools that we already use. And then, as I mentioned, we do use Slack. We've been using it and being more deliberate in our communications there. So hopefully that kind of answers the question. I don't know exactly what tools, I don't know who the question came from or what tools you're already using, but become more familiar with the tools and reporting already at your disposal, and then build in systems and processes around those where you're monitoring those things for red flags. And then when you do see a red flag pop up, do a little bit of digging and find out if it's a real concern or if it was maybe just a false, false alarm. Hopefully that helps answer that question.
Guy, if I can add to that.
Sure.
One of the things that we do is we have an activity report, and he was referring to PestPack. We use the same, but there's an activity report. We can see the activity going on during a work day on the computer. So we can see what they're doing, what's being entered in, what's not being entered in, how it was entered in, the whole 9 yards. The other tool we use, and this is a shameless plug for Slingshot, but I compare the calls that our people answer, because Slingshot gets our rollover calls. And so I've already got 2 or 3 years worth of data. And so I can take a look at, okay, how many calls did our people handle? How many calls did Slingshot handle? And so you can see, if there's a trade-off, okay, we're not going to handle the calls, we're going to push it off to Slingshot. And so, we monitor that and monitor the computer usage online if we need to. It's like I always say, you always trust your people to do the right thing, but once in a while you got to check it. And once in a while you just, pop in and check it and just take a look at it and, and see what's going on. But I think big picture wise, we didn't miss much of a beat through this process, but there are mechanisms that you can do to look in your systems, and you can see what's going on. Thanks.
All right, thank you. How are American PMPs meeting the increased demand for pest control when homeowners don't let technicians visit homes?
I could start with this one, Bill, and then feel free to chime in. Hopefully every company takes time every year to kind of forecast, how much money you're planning on putting in your marketing, what kind of sales force you have, what you've done in the past, what your goals are. So these all things help project kind of what you can anticipate so that you can properly staff, right? You want to have the proper labor in place to meet whatever demand you anticipate. This year, in March, when this kind of all started, we had a conversation with our marketing director, and we thought, are we going to have to strip our marketing budget this year and just kind of scratch it? Because we just didn't know. At that time, it looked like a lot of Americans were going to be losing their jobs, and a lot have, and that's been very difficult for all these people. But just like our businesses had to adapt, a lot of other businesses adapted as well, and people figured out how to work from home. And again, more people home, seeing more pests, more aware of issues within their yard. Some feedback that we got from customers too was, well, we canceled our trips and our camps and our sports activities and whatever this summer, so we have a little bit more disposable income. So there's a lot of variables that led into, and Slingshot actually, I think they said, just because they monitor and take sales for a bunch of companies throughout the country, I mean, there was something like a 300%, Chris, you can chime in if you want, but of increase in pest control demand. And so we felt that. There's a bit of a catch-22 here because people want it, but then they want us to be careful. It's like, I've got an ant problem inside my kitchen, but I don't want you to come inside. So again, we're in the business of managing customer expectations. It's just what we do. So yes, ants originate from the outside. So maybe there's some creative ways we can go about trying to address that interior issue to take care of that. But this is where those internal safety protocols that we took place were important to communicate to customers. We put up a link on our website to kind of let customers know what we were doing. In our email notifications a couple weeks prior to service, we let them know, here's what we're doing for interior services if you want it done. If you don't, completely fine. In our day prior notifications, just to kind of the reminders, kind of a gentle reminder of, if you need something done, we can, but here's kind of how we're approaching it. And here's what we expect from you as the customers, so that we maintain a safe workplace for our employees. So yeah, I think just by properly managing expectations is probably the best way. And again, we don't win in every situation, especially in this case, because, the coronavirus, there's a wide spectrum of how people feel about it. And Bill alluded to it earlier, the politicized nature of it. So putting all those opinions and feelings aside about that, this is how we're operating. Again, we kind of try to stay right down the middle to try to appease the majority of our client base and our employees to make sure that we're in a safe place. So anyways, I guess that's a long way of answering the question, but I would just say looking at how you manage the expectations in this particular situation would be the way that we've approached and we found to work.
And I echo that. What I find is that buyers or clients trust pest management professionals. And if we tell them we're going to do something and have a way to resolve an issue, is like Guy alluded to in terms of the ants on the inside of the structure and doing the majority of the work on the outside and only going inside if there's actually a problem. And if there is a problem, we were asking the questions about the COVID, and if they had any kind of COVID-related issues on the inside based on the four questions I talked about earlier, we don't go in. I'm not putting my people at risk, and we tell them that. And after you're all solved and all that, then we'll come in and take care of it. But I didn't see any pushback in terms of growth and predictability of the residential side of the business. We couldn't have predicted the growth that we saw this year. That was just unreal. And we had our projections early on based on the history and all that, but after coronavirus hit, there was probably a month delay, then all of a sudden somebody lit the fires and it just took off. And so we were pleased with that, but I think all in all, I think most of the clients out there trust us as pest management professionals to protect them, their health. We already do it already. Thanks.
That's a great point, Bill. Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Going back to what I said earlier, the biggest realization was we are essential. Some of our technicians maybe didn't feel like what they did was truly important. They sure do now, right? While everything else was shut down, they were still out there working. So I think that confidence that we instill into our employees needs to bleed into customers. And you're right, they do trust what we say because we should be the professionals on and the experts on the subject matter.
Okay, next question. How do you manage customers when an exterior is done, but they only want to pay 50% of the invoice because you didn't go inside?
So I'll jump in on this one real quick, but we've dealt with this, and I think we can all, I guess, and we can see where the customer is getting to that logical outcome. We've made it a point for years to emphasize that this is an exterior service, but the inside's included when requested. So it's not an exterior-interior service, because we've dealt with this question even prior to pandemic where, well, your guy only came out and did the outside. Why should I pay full price? Like, well, what we're doing is we're a structural pest control company. Pests originate from the exterior homes. Generally speaking, some pests can be introduced to the inside regardless of what we do on the outside, such as German cockroaches or something else. But just, again, going back to managing expectations in general is you're being charged X amount for the exterior service. Now, if you happen to want the inside done, that's part of the service. We're not going to charge you extra to do the inside. We're going to include that as part of our overall service. But by no means have we diluted the experience or potentially the results of what you're going to experience because we only did the outside. So a bit of a customer expectation dance there, depending on how they feel about it, because they want, right, we're all this way. We all want a deal on something. We don't want to pay full price and feel like we got ripped off by anyone, but it goes back to how that message is communicated from the point of sale. So we just always make it a point to explain that. This is an exterior service. The interior is included when requested. That way we get away from this sort of issue, because the fact of the matter is, pre-pandemic, again, 2/3 of our stops, a lot of people aren't home and we're doing exterior services, and we'll come back and do the inside if you need it done at no cost, but the exterior service is what you're paying us to do.
And Guy, to add on to that, we've taken the same approach, well, we have for years, and we get there and, we send them postcards. They know when we're coming. If we get there and they're not there, we do outside perimeter applications, and then we tell them, hey, you got a problem on the inside, let us know. And they were accustomed to that, so it wasn't an issue. If you have not been communicating that way ahead of time, or if your agreements don't suggest that, I suggest you relook at your agreements and rewrite them to incorporate that into it. Because vast majority of the work we do is on the outside, and if they happen to be home, like he was saying, maybe 1/3 of them are home and the rest aren't, and they got a problem, they call us, we come back. So we didn't have those issues.
Okay, for our last question, what new rodent management technology will make an impact over the next year?
Well, I probably want to jump in on that one. The rodent technology with the remote sensing, this pandemic thing took off, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, boy, I wish we were fully loaded with the remote sensing and out there running with it, because let's face it, in the commercial arena, a significant amount of time, 40% of your time is spent on the rodent control on the inside of a structure. And, the other neat thing about it is, when stuff is going on, when it happens, and all that kind of thing. And I've heard as much from a few of the clients have said that, that remote sensing, that's now become more important to them now as they thought about who they have come to their facilities, whether it's one that covers, 70, 80 buildings or whatever the case may be. They were more interested in talking about remote sensing now. So as we work through those technologies and those stuff, we've tested it several ones in different areas and so forth. So we haven't completely, threw ourselves in the pool yet and bought one system completely. But there is a lot of applications where this can be used to limit the exposures to one, our employees, and two, to their employees. And so I think there is some movement afoot in certain critical industries where this will be a benefit. Some of you may recall when the chicken plants and beef plants and all those plants were shutting down because of the virus. That was pretty significant. Now, before it got published, I heard about it a week beforehand, but there were some significant issues going on in these production plants because these food plants, these people got to stand shoulder to shoulder. Remote sensing would have been a beautiful thing. It would have saved a whole lot of problems and so forth and concerns that these food plants were having. And so I think that hit front and center. Schools, colleges, and alike, same thing. They're in hospitals. They're looking, how do we reduce the exposure? What other elements are out there that you can reduce the exposure, not just from the pest, but the passing of any kind of disease elements or anything else like that. I think our whole world has changed because of this virus.
Okay. Thank you, Bill and Dee, for discussing how leading PMPs are redefining strategies this year. As we wrap up, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I'm going to hand it over to Chris for some closing remarks regarding Slingshot, and then over to Danielle. Chris?
Thank you. Bill and Guy, I guess you're kind of the meat and the Chris sandwich here as I end this. I want to thank you guys. Great session. Thank you, PMP, again. Really, really found everyone's insights very, very valuable as we define our products and solutions to better fit pest control needs. And again, wanted to just thank you guys. That was really, really great. If you have any questions, feel free to use that question panel to send to Slingshot our way at sales@getslingshot.com, and look forward to more and more discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And thank you all for attending today's webinar, How Leading PMPs Are Redefining Strategies This Year, brought to you by Pest Management Professional Magazine and our sponsor, Slingshot. If you have any additional questions for the speakers, you can reach out to them directly. We have their email addresses up here on the slide. Their contact information is there for you. A recording of this webinar will be emailed to you tomorrow and posted to mypmp.net/webinars. Upcoming webinars from PMP will also be posted to that page, so be sure to stay tuned. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you'll join us again soon for another great webinar.